Thanks for taking the time to watch our presentation today. So right now we want to share with you a study that took place in the fall of 2020 that is titled Remote Learning and Intercultural Competence, Fostering Student Skill Development During a Global Pandemic. So this study was part of our 2020 SILMAR mini grant, and we're here to talk to you today about what this looked like to actually increase student intercultural competence during a pandemic in a remote learning course. So some background as to why this is important in an agriculture course, specifically our animal science course. And we know that this is necessary mostly because agriculture is such a global field today. And when I say global field, I'm mainly talking about globalization and the role that it has played in agriculture industry in recent years. So when I say globalization, it's simply described as when world economies are becoming increasingly interdependent of each other for things like trade, goods, and technology. And this is causing a shift in the agriculture workforce as we see students today taking jobs not only domestic-based, but also with transnational agriculture corporations, which is causing them to work more with diverse groups of people, as opposed to historically when agriculture jobs were very technical and hands-on and domestically based. Students now that are graduating from colleges of agriculture are now needing to be able to work with these diverse individuals because of the increase in globalization in the industry today. So as I said, we're seeing a shift in jobs in the agriculture industry. And when I say this graph really represents that well. So again, when we think about historic jobs in agriculture, things might come to mind like farming, working with animals, or other hands-on jobs. However, today we're seeing an increase in jobs becoming available in fields like management and business, science and technology, food production, and education, communication, and government. Because of this, our students now need to not only have the technical agriculture knowledge to work in their jobs, but also a good level of interpersonal skills to be able to thrive in these type of settings as well. And I want to mention too on this slide is that even students who take more traditional agriculture jobs, like technical jobs I mentioned at the beginning, will still need some of these interpersonal skills, or what from here on out we'll be referring to as essential skills. Some of these skills include things such as self-management, leadership, communication, working in teams, and problem solving. All of this group of skills and more are highly desired by agricultural employers. However, the problem we're seeing is that these skills agricultural employers want to see in students are also skills that are cited as lacking in recent graduates. And what I mean by that is that employers have a very specific set of things they want to see in graduates, but when agriculture students are coming in out of university, employers are not seeing these level of essential skills that they would like to in their recent hires. And one way that we can improve these skills in our students at the university level is through intercultural competence development. When I say intercultural competence, it means the ability of a person to react appropriately and effectively communicate in intercultural situations. So what we're looking at here is, can our students be placed in a situation with a group of diverse individuals and be able to communicate and work well and get a job accomplished? And we know that intercultural competence is a skill set that can be learned and developed over a lifetime. We also know that intercultural competence is a skill that can be developed in the classroom itself. So what this means is that when we take intercultural competence and we embed it in our courses on campus, we're allowing even more students to have the access to practice and develop these skills that our employers are looking for. And it's even been found that recently intercultural competence can be increased in online courses. So a little background into why we completed this 2020 study. In the 2019, we completed a study in the course Introduction to Animal Agriculture that looked at specifically increasing intercultural competence in our students. So the study involved with students taking the IDI, which we took place at the pre-level at IDI, you'll see represented on the top bars. And then the second time at the end of the semester, you'll see represented on that bottom line. You'll notice that with our control and intervention group, there was a significant difference found in the amount that our students in the intervention group increased compared to what our control group increased. Students in our intervention group for this study completed a variety of different intercultural assignments throughout the semester, where they had the opportunity to reflect, learn from each other, and develop their own intercultural competence throughout the semester. Students in the control group did not complete any intercultural intervention assignments throughout the semester. And again, you'll see noted on this bottom line of bars that our intervention group could increase intercultural competence significantly more than our control group did, according to the IDI. So with that going forward, having this background onto why we offered this course in 2020 with similar methods, my colleague will now explain what we did in the fall of 2020 to increase these skills in our students again.
COVID-19 in fall of 2020 forced the course to go from completely 100% face-to-face to asynchronous and asynchronous online learning. So we're going to talk to you a little bit today about the study that we did in fall 2020 to try to account for this not only transition to online learning, but also looking at the different types of intercultural assignments that we did for the students. So with that, our objective of this particular study we're going to share with you was to study and observe student intercultural competence before and after they completed a series of reflection-based intercultural learning assignments. And these intercultural learning assignments were all administered online in a remote learning format, as well as we redesigned some of our different reflection assignments that were more focused on global animal science. So all of our methods that we use in this course were IRB approved. In Animal Science 102, I've taught this course the last 5 years. It is a 16-week semester-long course, and this particular semester in 2020 was offered to 161 students completely online. We did have synchronous and asynchronous, with the synchronous portion of the course occurring one time per week for an approximately 15-minute lecture, where we really worked on trying to provide the relevance of the course material for that week, and then a one time per week, 1 hour lab discussion, where students were divided into 1 of 5 laboratory sections, and then they used within this section that 1 hour time period to further talk about not only the lab portion, but also part of the lecture that was taught that week. Now, the asynchronous part of the class consisted of self-paced learning modules that students completed on the week's topic at the beginning of the week, and then laboratory modules and packets that were completed towards the end of the week prior to the student attending the lab discussion at the end of the week. Of those 161 students, we had 110 students, or about 70%, were animal sciences majors, which is not surprising to us because this course is a required course in the animal science curriculum. And approximately 60% were first-year students. Again, our first-year students are really strongly encouraged to enroll in this class their first semester on campus. So again, these demographics weren't really a surprise for us. So students, as I've already said, were divided into 5 random laboratory sections that they met synchronously every Friday for 1 hour. We had 3 of the lab sections that were designated the intervention group, who received intercultural learning activities we'll describe in a few minutes. And then the other 2 laboratory sections, which was approximately 70 students, were considered the control group. And I'll go over the type of assignments they had as well. So the interventions all took place during the selected laboratory sections, and in certain time points during the semester, the first 15 to 20 minutes of the laboratory discussion was based on either the intervention, intercultural learning assignment, or some discussion on whatever the control group had during that week. We also, for this year, in response to some of the feedback we got from students in 2019, we did invite a former student of mine who now works at Cargill to come in and talk about her role in the professional industry, as well as talk about the importance of the people she works with and having intercultural competence. And this seemed to be, as we'll share in a little bit, really resonated with the students, because we were able to bring in somebody from outside of the university to talk about internships and how this type of skills that we were trying to provide them would be really important for their long-term career goals. In addition to completing these assignments, as the students took the IDI, they were given the Intercultural Development Plan, and we worked with students throughout the semester to come up with their own individualized goals based on their IDP. So here you can see the different weeks of the semester that intercultural learning assignments were given to students that were in the intervention group. The first during week 5, and then during week 13, students had due their beginning of their intercultural development plan, and then at the very end, they needed to reflect back on those goals they had made for themselves. So we spent time talking about those. All the assignments were graded and returned back with comments to students within 1 week of them providing or submitting the assignment due date. What I really want to point out, what's really important for this particular assignment compared to what we did in 2019, is in 2019 we used very different, more broad intercultural learning tools such as the IM poem. We had students visit an ethnic market to have a different type of experience outside of what they're normally used to. However, this year, because of feedback from students, we wanted to make the assignments really relevant to them. Why is this important for global animal agriculture? So we developed 3 different assignments, reflection assignments. that were all in some type of either dairy production, aquaculture, and chicken production, which aligned with the week that we were doing the assignments. And this really forced students to not only watch videos, think about different types of production systems, but make some reflective ideas and some comments based on what those were. And some examples of those include questions like, after exploring this website, how has your perspective changed in how you view the role of dairy production in developing countries? So students were encouraged to really think about different ways of production, why people might be doing those ways, and why that might be different than what we do here in the United States. We also asked questions like, after watching this video, how would you describe the impact that aquaculture has on developing countries? And then finally, another example from the chicken assignment was, list 2 ways in which poultry play a role besides food or income. Do you think that these socio-cultural roles that poultry serve are just as important as food and income? Explain why or why not. So the underlying theme was global animal agriculture, but we embedded intercultural learning within the assignment, and we asked students not only to complete the assignment, but to provide reflection on those assignments. And at the same time, each of these weeks that we have listed here, students who were in the control group also received a summary type assignment. So we focused on some key issues that were occurring in the news. So some hot topics, different things that we may have seen that occurred during the fall 2020 related to animal agriculture. So students completed these assignments, and then we asked them to reflect on them as well. What was key to this is that they were still reflecting, but it was not based on any type of intercultural learning assignment that they had. So the Intercultural Development Inventory was the assessment tool that we used for this project. We administered it at week 3, which was our pre-intervention, and then again at week 14 for our post-intervention. We had an 88% response rate in the class, and we also held an end of the semester focus group so we could gain some qualitative data from our students on what their overall feelings were on the impact of these assignments for the students who were in the intervention group. For analysis, we use our PROC-GLM procedure conducted using SPSS, and we wanted to compare the differences between the intervention and the control group during their pre and post IDI scores. And then all statistical significance was declared at p-value of less than 0.05, but I'll also point out that based on the IDI, changes of 7 points or above are considered a meaningful change in students' response to the pre and post IDI. So the next part we're going to get into is our results. So what did we find with these 161 students that took the IDI and that we were able to observe this pre and post? So you can see initially for the pre-IDI section that students at the very start of our semester during week 3, there weren't any differences between IDI scores between the control and the intervention group. So these students were really primarily in both groups operating in the area of minimization as well as polarization. And so we weren't surprised to see any differences between these groups at the beginning, but we felt it was really important to look at this before we began our cultural interventions. For the post-IDI, you can see here on the bottom part of the graph, the control and intervention, we can see that there is a big difference, or there was a difference between how our control group students responded to their summaries and then how our intervention students responded to the intercultural learning activities. So we can see those that had the intercultural learning activities increased by almost 6 points on the IDI scale. Those that received the control group, you can see that there's very minimal. In fact, there was exactly a 1-point regression as a whole, as a group on the IDI. So we were able to show that as a group, students who received the intercultural intervention did have statistically significant increase in their IDI scores compared to the control between the pre and the post. With the IDI, we also felt that it was really important to observe the movement on the intercultural development continuum. And we haven't talked about this yet during this presentation, but the IDC is a great way to look at the different stages of students as they progress through. So we have everything from denial up to adaptation. And you can see from the beginning and the end that the majority of our students were in fact in both groups within polarization and minimization, but I want to point out some key changes that we saw between the pre and the post. If we look at minimization to acceptance, you can see that we actually had an increase in the number of students that went from minimization up into acceptance during between the pre and the post IDI in our intervention group. When we look at the control group, we don't see this change. We actually see an increase in the number of students that move into denial. So we have a progression for the majority of students, or for a large percentage of the students, from minimization into acceptance, or from polarization into minimization as a result of the intercultural learning assignments, but we don't see the same type of movement when we observe the control students during this time. From the focus group, as I said, we had 6 students who were part of the focus group experience at the end of the semester. We sent these students a Qualtrics survey early on, asking them to give us some feedback on the embedded assignments, and then we actually held a 1-hour focus group with these students, a subset of them, and I'd like to share with you a little bit about what the students had to say. So we'll share with you the first quote. A student responded, "Yes, I really enjoyed the reflection assignments, and they allowed me to better understand the differences between animal science practices around the world, and I never considered the dairy industry in the US versus practices in Africa." So students really were starting to think about differences in culture, how we may be doing things from an agricultural production standpoint here compared to how others may be doing it in different parts of the world. Another student responded that the reflections about global ag were helpful because I got to see how agriculture in different parts of the world. The IDI reflections did not, though, because they didn't have much to do with agriculture. And in this particular quote that we have here, the students referring to the Intercultural Development Plan that they created or that they completed between the beginning and the end of the semester. So these were very broad goals that weren't necessarily related to agriculture, but things that students could do. So we found it really interesting that the student was identifying with the global ag portion of the project research program and saying they saw benefit to that, but really still weren't quite sure why they had to do something related to the IDP that wasn't what they felt very specific to their program.
So now moving on to some final discussion, conclusions, and the impact of this study that we feel we made from this 2020 study. So a few discussion points about this main study is that we did see that even in this online format, intercultural competence absolutely can be developed in students. We saw that not only numerically on the IDI, but also in that shift that we saw along the intercultural development continuum as well. However, we do recognize that because of COVID-19 and remote learning, it did provide us a less controlled environment. However, the fact that our intervention group can increase on the Intercultural Development Inventory almost 6 points as a whole allows us to comfortably conclude that this does still have an impact on students' intercultural competence development. And along with that, students also enjoyed completing these intercultural learning assignments that were based on global agriculture. So as Dr. Karcher just went over a few examples from students, we had many more quotes like that from our students saying they enjoyed these assignments and they're glad they saw a connection to the global agriculture opposed to just the individual intercultural assignments that we completed in the 2019 study. And we do also recognize that we did not see as much growth in the 2020 study compared to the 2019 study, but this could be due again to several outside factors that were beyond our control. From COVID-19 to the state of the rest of our world in 2020 to students having added stressors being freshmen, trying to navigate college and a pandemic, there could be a lot of other things that went into students not growing as significantly as we saw in 2019. A few more brief conclusions and takeaway points that we really want to make sure you're taking home today is that students saw value in completing assignments when they were embedded in topics that they were already interested in. So as the majority of our students were animal science majors taking an Introduction to Animal Agriculture course, we can probably assume that they were interested in animal agriculture. So when we had these assignments that were embedded within animal agriculture, they were much more interested in them. And this also shows positive results to support that exposing students to these global agriculture topics can increase their levels of intercultural competence. Another important note to take home is that it's absolutely possible to provide students with the technical agriculture knowledge that they need and intercultural skills within the same curriculum. So at the beginning of this presentation, we really talked about how employers wanted to see the specific skill set in students, but that doesn't mean that they still don't need the agriculture knowledge. They still need to know about their field, but it's really important that we can provide the same curriculum and even within the same assignment, the chance for students to grow their technical knowledge and the chance to increase these intercultural skills. And the impact of this study going forward is that we have seen that intercultural competence can be developed in undergraduates through a variety of methods. In our study alone, we used reflection assignments, we allowed students to learn from each other and gave them the opportunity to have out-of-class experiences as a way to take an autonomous role in their learning and their own development of intercultural competence. We also see that embedding these intercultural learning assignments into curriculum is one way to better prepare students with the skills they need for their future careers. As I've already said, employers want to see a very specific skill set in students, and because agriculture is becoming more globalized, the specific intercultural skill set is going to be a very important tool that students have going into their future careers. And again, intercultural learning assignments can absolutely be designed to teach the technical knowledge needed and work to develop students' intercultural competence from their first year of college just coming in as freshmen. So with that, we are happy to take any questions that can be directed to Dr. Liz Karcher at her email below. And again, thank you for coming to our presentation. Please do not hesitate to reach out on how we can help you or provide more information about this study.